Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today for this lunchtime live from Flagship Partners? My name's Pete Rushmer and I'm the Managing Director of Flagship. I'm on a slightly wobbly table working from home, and to be honest, I probably should be being quite careful over the fact that the children are on school holidays today, so they are here, and I could be interrupted at any time, but I've told them to try and be quiet at least for about 10 minutes whilst I make this video for people. So one of the things that I see regularly in my Facebook group, which is around, I get asked regularly what other transport managers include in their transport compliance audits and what is part of the audit. And one of the things that I wanted to share, which I haven't really spoken about before, is why auditing is so important and what is included within the audit process, and particularly if you've never done it before, what should be covered. Good morning, Martin, or afternoon even. I hope you're well. Thanks for being here and having a listen. So with O license auditing, I recommend auditing your transport processes on an annual basis, and what we include in that is initially the operator's license and the administration behind it. So on a regular basis, particularly I would say on a monthly basis, if you're moving vehicles around, if you have trailer changes, if you buy and change vehicles on a regular basis, it could be even more regularly. But it's worth going on the goods vehicle O license system and just making sure that all of the details are correct. And that's the first port of call for the compliance audit, is to ensure that all of the details are correct, the operating centre is correct, and the transport manager is correct. So if that's your own business, then that's fairly straightforward. You should know all of that. But if as an external company going in, that's something that we just make sure is absolutely correct, and everything is there. Are there any, is there any operating centres that need to be declared that aren't part of it, that would potentially form part of any recommendations? The other thing, when it's available, we check would be the operator compliance risk score and the OCRS score. We'd look at MOT test history and any roadside stops for anything which is potentially could be part of a recommendation, because the purpose of an audit isn't to necessarily find failure, it's to find what we can learn, and it's to find what we can learn to do better and how we can improve processes for where they're falling down. So initially, we'd start off with that operator license and admin. We'd make sure that there's a contract in place if there's an external transport manager, for example, or even if there's an in-house transport manager, is there a good quality contract in place, understanding whose responsibilities are whose and how those processes are working in that business. The next thing we'd look at would be vehicle documentation compliance. So we'd understand, we'd look at the vehicle files around MOT certificates, making sure that tachos are calibrated. We would make sure that there's VTG certificates, plating certificates, and there is a nice process in place for managing all of those elements. If there's Lola tests, are they in date, and that kind of thing. Then the third area we would look at is around the driver compliance. So we'd look specifically at driver contracts. We'd make sure there's a good contract in place. Is there an induction process in place? What training takes place? How does that training work? And then we start to look at the driver's hours and making sure there's a good process in place for managing EU driver's hours, making sure there's a process for understanding working time directive as well. What systems being used? Is missing mileage being monitored? Is there a way for documenting any or investigating anything like that? And also, is there an escalation process, particularly for persistent people who persistently challenge those rules or continually get infringements? Is there a way of escalating that? Again, if there isn't, then that's something that may form part of any recommendations following the audit. So I think that's pretty much it from that point of view. And then we start to look at the maintenance schedule and look at how regularly those vehicles are serviced and making sure that they are within the boundaries of the undertakings for the license. We would look at how often brake tests are occurring. Are they at every service? Are they more periodic than that? And are the brake tests sufficient? Does the operator or the transport manager understand what the brake tests are saying? Are there brake imbalances? Are they fully loaded? And then we can make any recommendations there as well, because we know that increasingly we're looking to ensure that it's not just a pass when, brake test can often say pass when actually it isn't a pass. And we need to make sure that it's not just because the brakes are locking, that there's sufficient brake usage there to make sure that there isn't an imbalance in the brakes as well, because that's something that's becoming increasingly important at the moment. So from a maintenance point of view, we'd make sure also that defects are being reported. Is there follow-up on those defects? Is it clear that where things have been defected, there's actually a repair that's been taken place? And we start to look at those as part of that audit as well. And that ties us into the next area, which is around driver administration defecting. So how do daily checks get managed? Is there a way of managing those? So, for example, gate checks is the driver defects being reported, and then are they being linked to a repair invoice as well? If drivers are expected to carry out a repair themselves, have they been properly trained to do so? Or are they signed off as competent to be able to do so as well? So those are some of the things we look there from a defect point of view as well. We then start to look at the operating centre itself. So is the operating centre sufficient? Has it got a health and safety in place? Is there signage? Does it match what's on the O license? Is there anything that we need to be aware of around the quality of that? Is there sufficient space and lighting to be able to carry out daily checks? And is it a safe working environment? And then the other thing we often recommend is having a look at a maintenance provider as well, and making sure that those maintenance providers are properly audited on a regular basis as well. So from a point of view as an operator, do you ensure that your maintenance providers have got calibrated brake rollers? Do you make sure that they have calibrated equipment? What standard are their technicians trained to? And obviously, if it's an in-house maintenance provider, so it's their own workshop, what equipment's there? Is it sufficient? Is the torque wrench calibrated? And part of that maintenance process, we would be looking at wheel torque procedure, making sure that what happens when there's tires. Is there a tire agreement in place? Is tire usage monitored? There's obviously a whole range of things. So I'm not going to go through the whole audit document itself, but hopefully those give you an idea of some of the range of things that we're able to check or should be included if you were to create your own compliance audit. Those are some of the areas that you'd be able to look at, and there's questions you can create off of those different areas and start to think about the different license undertakings to ensure that your operator is meeting those standards. So those can be applied if you're a consultant, or even if you're an in-house transport manager and you wanted to audit your own processes. Hopefully that there's some ideas there for people to think about that might be able to help them. Likewise, if you're looking for an external audit provider, that is something that Flagship Partners are able to do. We've got several transport managers here that are very well versed in understanding and helping to audit operators. So with regards to the audit, that kind of explains the what. So what are the things that we're looking at, and what do you get off the back of that? Well, off the back of that audit, you get a full report as to what's been met and what hasn't been met. But we also give you the actions that are required. So what potentially would be major non-conformities, what would be minor non-conformities, and then any recommendations as to best practice. So they may not be a breach of compliance, but it may be a best practice. It may give ideas for moving forward. So it's often good to get someone else to potentially check your work. And I'm more than happy to have my systems audited, and we operate to various standards. So we have people to check those. And likewise, it should be something which is done confidentially, and something that we pride ourselves on, that we always carry out audits in a confidential basis to ensure that an operator is able to be proactive in the way that they're managing their compliance. So where does it take place? My recommendation is obviously they can be done remotely, but I do recommend doing an in-person compliance audit. I've not not carried out one and felt as comfortable with it remotely as what I would do if I physically go and see a premises, go and see an operating centre, go and see maintenance providers. It makes you much more confident when you make those recommendations, and that you can see all of the transport management system that you need to be able to see to be able to make all of the recommendations. So when should an audit take place? Well, I recommend potentially doing an audit or having an independent audit on an annual basis to ensure that the compliance is up to date. It may not need to be done as necessarily as regularly as that, but it does help to make sure that there's no weaknesses and there's no sort of blind spots, for example, because there's always certain tasks that some people prefer to others or find easier than others, and it's often something that might blindside you, which needs to be done. So how does that work? So normally we allocate a day, depending on the size of the business. It might take more than a day, and sometimes if it's very small or a very small transport operation, it might take less than a day. But how is it done? We normally arrive. We meet and speak to the transport manager, the directors. We start to understand what the culture of the business is as well as understanding how the maintenance is carried out, whether it's online, whether the TACO system's online, and what sort of paperwork we need to look at as well as part of that audit. So, and all of it can depend on how long that's going to take, but we'd expect to be with an operator for a couple of days, a day, or at least a couple of hours onwards. And finally, I guess the question is why have a compliance audit? It's an important part of any management system to ensure that we test that system and to ensure that there isn't any blind spots, and particularly within safety, within transport compliance, making sure that we have a proactive management system, that we don't just wait for things to go wrong and then fix them. It's good to, on a proactive basis, make sure we check those things. So whether you do it on yourself, which is fine, and whether you use any of those hints that I've given earlier about what to check, that's fine. You're more than able to carry out your own audit and do your own checks and make sure that that's properly documented. Or you may be interested in someone externally doing that for you. Again, there's lots of people that are able to do that. But if you were interested, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation around that from Flagship. From time to time, we do offer offers on audits. So if you are interested, please do give us a shout, and we'd be delighted to speak to you. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If there's anything I've missed, I'm more than happy for you to drop a comment and let me know. But otherwise, please do share it, and I hope that you've got value from this session. Thank you very much. I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel, and my business, Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.